All right. How's everybody feeling today? So awesome. Excellent. That's what we like to hear. I think this might be my first security conference ever where I can wear like jeans and a t-shirt and I feel comfortable. It's kind of nice. Usually I have to wear like a suit and things like that and look respectable and presentable. But this is LocoMocoSec where we get to do it our way. We get to learn stuff and we get to interact with really cool people who are clearly passionate about what they do. And we've had a lot of good content, a lot of fantastic speakers throughout the day. And what we wanted to do for this particular panel is give an opportunity, because these gentlemen here, and I'll introduce them briefly, have done some amazing work in their careers. And it's work that's worth diving into a little bit, that we can get some lessons learned, and it gives you an opportunity to peer more into like what motivated them, what challenges they ran into, and really learn from these guys. So I've been fortunate enough to done some cool things here, but I've also looked up to these guys a lot because they've done some really amazing things and put a lot of software time into the world. So who we have here is Gene Kim. Gene Kim's career goes way, way back, probably predates even mine. Gene Kim was the primary developer and creator of Tripwire, for those that don't know Tripwire. So imagine that, we get to have Gene Kim on stage and is also a published author. We'll give them an opportunity to go dive more into about what Tripwire does, and everything like that. We have Troy Hunt, who is the very famous Have I Been Pwned website, and all the other cool, I'm forgetting the name of the website right now that you post all your content to. I'm sorry? No, the platform. Not Patreon. Pluralsight, there we go. All the content on Pluralsight, sorry. Yeah, you know, like you kind of educate everybody in AppSec. And we have Mark Arpaia, who gave us a great presentation on Osquery. So that's all I'm going to say for the moment, and I'll ask these guys some questions. But if, I guess, Troy, you got the mic. Please tell us exactly what Have I Been Pwned is, and like why you started it.
All right, so my elevator pitch. So Have I Been Pwned is a data breach aggregation platform. So when there's a data breach, like I mentioned this morning, LinkedIn, Dropbox, Ashley Madison, and about 270 others, when the data is distributed publicly, I locate it very often through sources that provide it because they support the project. I aggregate it, so I extract the email addresses out of it. It all goes up online into a whole bunch of cloud storage magic, and people can then come along, search it, and say, where was I exposed? And there's about just under 5 billion separate accounts in the system at the moment. That the thing got...
Did you say accounts or records?
So I call it accounts insofar as I have personally 12 accounts. Now with that one email address, it's been in 12 different breaches, not Ashley Madison. So it's been on a bunch of different places. And then I guess there's a whole bunch of other stuff it does, but in terms of scale, it's anywhere from 100,000 people a day through to, I looked at it today and I had 111,000 in the last 6 hours. So it is very surprisingly popular. I don't know why it's so popular, but here we are.
Fantastic. Gene.
Why don't you go for it next?
Cool, yeah, my name is Mike, not Mark. But,
sorry.
It's all good. It's actually more common than you would expect. So OSQuery, if you saw the talk earlier, if not, OSQuery is an operating system instrumentation tool, and it allows you to articulate facts about operating systems in SQL and then use that concept to generate interesting logs about your environments.
On that one, why that problem? Like, why did that problem need to be solved?
Operating system intrusion detection?
Yeah, why did Osquery need to be built? Like, why did, like...
Yeah, so I mean, I've been working on host intrusion detection for a bit, and OSQuery specifically, I went to Facebook, and Facebook had like not so great intrusion detection on Mac OS and like nothing in production. So we really wanted to improve intrusion detection on Mac OS as well as add it in production. And we looked around at trying to use a lot of existing tools like OSSec and Tripwire and Google GER and stuff like that, and none of them like checked all the boxes that we need, and I kind of articulated what those boxes were in the original talk when we open sourced it at Security Scale in 2014. Yeah.
Excellent, thank you.
By the way, I love that last talk on CAPTCHAs, and I love the background of like how he got there, and I think what I would love I mean, I have 3 kids. I have a 10-year-old and 2 8-year-olds, and man, I want them to see that talk because you know the serendipitous journey of like what it takes to get dragged into interesting problems. So I guess my equivalent would be I was in a science fair in high school, and I got picked up to join Sun Microsystems in 1986. So as a sophomore in high school, I got to work half-time as a file system QA engineer and a system administrator. And that eventually, it was around the time of the Internet Morse worm. And so I was reading all the papers on it, and the name that kept on coming up over and over again was Gene Spafford at Purdue University. So I knew I wanted to go there. It turned out it was the only college I was accepted to. But I wish I had known where Purdue University was, because it's in the cornfields of Indiana. And I think, had I known exactly what I was signing up for, maybe I wouldn't have gone to Purdue. But anyway, it turned out to be the best thing for me. And so that was something I wrote as an undergraduate independent study project in '91. After I got fired from the Purdue University Computing Center, I needed a job, and so I ended up working for Spafford as an undergraduate student, and that widely became one of the most widely used security tools for Unix. The other thing I'll share is like in my 13 years at Tripwire from '97 to 2010. I mean, it was so fun because that's where I got to start this kind of study of high performers, and so I'm so grateful for the Tripwire experience and how it allowed me to actually do this thing kind of on the side for commercial purposes. But you know, it's certainly been my area of passion, you know, long since I've left Tripwire.
So why Tripwire? Why did, at least at the time, why did that need to be solved? What was that era like?
Oh yeah, so the Morse worm, right? The big problem was, actually it's amazing to think about the statistics. I think I have this right. The Internet Morse worm was the first widespread, you know, thing of malware where 6,000 servers were taken down.
6,000?
That was 10% of all, and that's actually a huge number because that was 10% of all the servers online. So, you know, so that number is obviously orders of magnitude higher. And so the big problem was like, why did it take so much effort to detect and correct for the problem, right? For all these files that were changed.
All right, so let's start with some of the more easy ones. Are you like, these are all very successful projects. Did you have any idea that they were going to be this successful when you started? Is this what you imagined they would be, or is it mostly like for you?
No. So, I mean, for me with Have I Been Pwned, like when I started out, I had downtime when I was traveling for work, and I just remember like I had a couple of evenings free in a hotel room in the Philippines, and I was like, oh, this will be a good idea. You know, like I'll give this a go. And in fact, my motivation for Have I Been Pwned was partly because I was seeing some really interesting behaviors in terms of account reuse. So I was analyzing data breaches and going, hey, look at this. Like this guy has the same password on this site and that site. Wow, that's amazing. Isn't this interesting? I wonder if these people know that they've been in multiple data breaches. And this was like half my motivation. And then the other half of the motivation was, I really want to play with some cool Azure technology and build some stuff on the cloud. This seems like a good excuse. and like this was just like scratching the geek itch. And you know, to this day, like a big part of what I enjoy doing about it is doing things like building it to the scale it's at today for a cost of a couple of cups of coffee a day. Like this is kind of the geeky fun objective. So that was always my goal. And I almost wonder if the success of it is partly because that was the only goal. It wasn't like, how can I go out and make something that would just make a shitload of money? You know, we'll do that from day one. I don't think it would have done what it's done if that was the objective. So I'm surprised that it is where it is.
Gene, Mark, same question.
Yeah, so OS Query actually wasn't the first host intrusion detection system that I wrote in open source, and the first one was like miserably unsuccessful. So I definitely like had higher expectations for OS Query, but it is like OS Query is now the most starred security software on all of GitHub, you know, for whatever that metric is worth. And yeah, I mean, it totally has outpaced my expectations for sure.
You know, I think the advice I would give my kids, right, is that early in one's career, right, one doesn't actually have a worthy problem. I mean, this, maybe I'm the exception, right? But I mean, it's like so the short of not having an exciting project to work on, you go work for someone who actually does have an exciting project to work on. And It's amazing when you can get that sort of overlap of, someone needs tenure, which is actually reliant upon, a ton of motivated, desperate graduate students, right? But I think what has changed, right, is that, boy, it takes so, technology enables to build so much with so little these days, right? I mean, it's just, you can get something spun up in Heroku in, a couple minutes, whereas, to do anything of scale before, even 20 years ago was like a substantial effort. You actually did need millions of dollars just to get engineers, let alone, to actually ship something. Anyway, it sure is easy these days. It's something I'm just constantly in awe of.
Let's try this question here. So, a lot of us are going to try to, probably at least some of the people in the audience here are going to try to build, whether they know it or not, large-scale projects that might be wildly successful. When they encounter those efforts, in context of yours, what if anything surprised you that you would not have expected at the start? Like, what was the most surprising thing you ran into that you like, what, good, bad, or otherwise?
I was surprised it was popular, if I'm honest. And honestly, like to this day, that kind of surprised me. My motives might have been a little bit different as well. I think, like I said, if I had set out with the commercial objective and I had done any sort of objective kind of analysis of who would use this, maybe I wouldn't be. But for me, I was just surprised at the adoption rate. And I think, like I said before, it was largely due to the fact that it was available for free. As I touched on the keynote as well, one of the things that sort of surprised me is using the word pwned, which is, I'm sure some people probably hate it, but using that seemed to generate a sense of interest and curiosity that I never would have had before. And I never called it that because of that. Frankly, one of the reasons I called it that is because I could get the domain name and I could get like the .com version of it and the .com.au. So, that's sort of a couple of the things I think that stick out in the front of my mind about surprising. And probably the only other thing, and this sort of goes to the point about how much you can do on cloud today, I'm surprised that I've been able to build something at the scale that it is without actually having to spend a lot of money. Like it is literally still in the hundreds of dollars a month to support that scale. And that's, I think that's pretty insane.
How about you, Mark? What surprised you about the project? Something that, you wouldn't have expected at the start? Other than like it became popular.
Sure, yeah. Something that was surprising, I think, so like I said, when I worked at Etsy, I worked on this host intrusion detection system, which we actually internally call Trip Yarn. So it's super funny to, Etsy's a craft site, yarn, tripwire. So it's super funny to be on stage with Gene. But when we open sourced Trip Yarn, we called it Midas, Mac Intrusion Detection Analysis System, which, best part was the name. And we like the way that this piece of software was extended was via modules. And these modules were written in Python, and we had a bunch of them at Etsy, and we didn't open source them because that was our hashtag special sauce. And when we open sourced it, it was not very popular because there was no way that organizations could take this platform and use it and immediately get value. And I guess that shouldn't have been surprising, but it was pretty surprising to me because I thought the platform was sufficient for people to kind of start building their own thing. But that was definitely something that we really tried to address with OS Query that really made it successful, was that by using SQL to articulate facts about operating systems that you want to instrument, it allowed us, we can give away all of the tables, we can give away all of the, I always say we were able to give away the answers to the questions without giving away the questions that we were asking. So because OS Query has a launch D table on Mac OS, doesn't tell you anything about the how Facebook analyzes launch D data, it just gives you the raw capability. So kind of decoupling OPSEC from capability and still producing a valuable piece of open source security software. That coming to that conclusion was initially surprising, but in retrospect, it seems somewhat obvious.
Yeah, I would actually probably consider this my biggest learning. When I was at TripWire for 13 years, in some ways, my biggest embarrassment is the fact that I got kind of further and further away from the technology. And so that's into operations, looked into ITIL, cross-population studies, compliance, how you build compliance requirements. I thought it was And so that meant that like my last bit of production code contribution was probably around 2010. And yeah, in my head, that made total sense. I thought that was my highest, best use of me. But I think what my learning was, and hopefully this should be relevant to every person in information security, is that to do great things that are reliant on technology, you have to have a great technology organization, right? And I think you can't do that without being close to the technology. So I guess I got my graduate degree in composite design. I was telling someone in this earlier today, that even though I was formally trained in that, I self-identified mostly as an ops person, to some degree security, but then sometime in the last 2 years, something flipped. It's like, now I really self-identify as a developer, right? It's never been so much fun to build things, and I've been having so much fun today. Just my language of choice now is Clojure and ClojureScript. That exists on the JVM or JavaScript, and there's just it's never been so fun, to be building things, and it's never been easier or cheaper to do it. And so I think what the implication for security professionals is there's a comment from the one presented in JavaScript. She said, to opine on frameworks, you actually have to be familiar with the frameworks and the idioms and so forth. Like, oh my gosh, yeah, right? I mean, in some ways, we have to be expert in the things that we're supposed to be contributing to, and ideally, we should be contributing as fellow engineers, not as some sort of compliance person at the end, right? Who's shaking her finger saying you're doing all these things wrong.
So just one last question before we open it up to you guys to ask questions of these guys and give you that opportunity. What would be one thing you would recommend to those here that are perhaps looking to follow in similar footsteps to build their own super cool project to solve their own major problem that they're seeing, whatever it happens to be, to scratch the itch, something that's personally interesting? What would you recommend? A lesson learned.
I would actually say this almost goes into sort of the thing of engineering greatness, right? You need great technical practices, cultural norms, architecture, and so forth. But the thing that I'm become very fascinated about is the success of those projects. Right? What actually causes certain GitHub projects that get all those great stars? And I think one of the working theories we have is that it's about how easy it is to make a contribution. There's nothing more frustrating to put in a pull request, only to have no one ever look at it and just get parked there for years, right? I think the ones that really, the working theory is that the ones that succeed are the ones where you can make a contribution, you get thanked, right? And that creates a positive feedback loop. So if you are working on one of these open source projects, right, make it as easy for possible as to contribute, and whether it's content, whether it's documentation, and so forth. And I think there's a lot of reasons to believe that how quickly, just like lead time into production is a leading metric, it's like the lead time for some desire to contribute to actually being in the repo is probably an indicator of project success.
I think for me, on reflection, probably one of the best things I did was I had a really simple minimum viable product. Like my MVP was, there's a text box on a page, and you enter an email address and it will come back and tell you stuff. Like it did really, really simple stuff. But I iterated really quickly on it. So it's like that went there, and a few weeks later, okay, now there's an API. And then a few weeks later, now there's a domain searchability. And I just feel that in this industry, and I think back to sort of my corporate time as well, we spend so much time trying to get everything just right. And I suspect as security professionals, we do that a lot as well. Like let's set a really, really high minimum bar. And somewhere in there, there's a healthy balance between trying to have enough features and enough security and actually trying to deliver working software. And I think if we can get working software out there much easier, even if it's a limited subset, that gives us the opportunity to get traction and grow the thing and then to add to it over time.
I would say the thing I would love to see in open source security software is, I'm going to use an example. So, does anyone remember the WireLurker malware on macOS? It doesn't really matter. There was a piece of malware called WireLurker on macOS like a year or so ago, several years ago actually, and Palo Alto Networks found it. And they wrote this Python script that you would run, Python detect wirelurker.py, and it would like print a line, and it would be like, it would print like 8 lines, and one of them might say, hey, like you're infected with WireLurker. And like that, in my opinion, wasn't I think the research was great, but I don't think that was a really compelling piece of open source software because the people, the audience for that kind of capability are organizations. You know, organizations care about whether or not devices are infected, and that piece of software wasn't necessarily super. You can't deploy that, run it, look for this string in the output. That's not a great way to productionalize this detection capability. So I would just encourage you to reason about the intended audience of what you're going to create and reason about how those individuals like to deploy software in their environment and how they can get signal most effectively and stuff like that. And if possible, you know, that instead of writing this new tool, they could have added a piece of public intel to OS query or added an OpenIOC or something like that, that perhaps organizations with existing installations for intrusion detection could have just you know, ingested that intel or something. So just reason about how your audience is going to consume what you're creating and try to make it as effective and simple for them as possible to integrate into their environment.
Fantastic. So opportunity for you guys to ask questions of these guys. Just raise your hand, I'll call on you. What questions might you want to ask of these guys? Yes?
So one of the challenges I think we all face is sort of that, you know, security versus convenience. So I'd just be interested in understanding how and where you evaluate your that.
In fact, one of the fun conversations I'm looking forward to continue with Dr. Back from earlier today, we were reflecting on the talks that we heard, and you know, I think my primary reaction is yes, DOM, Purify, and all these things are absolutely great, but I never want to type those. I want to never type those words. I want the compiler to do it for me. Right? I mean, I think one of the things the hardest thing I've ever done was actually learn a functional programming language like Clojure, and what I found was that, and it really took me 60 hours of reading before I could write my first line of code. I mean, it's a Lisp language. I've never learned Lisp before, but what I learned in doing that was that, wow, there's a whole category of errors I don't make anymore, just because, you know, mutating state is just so treacherous. And I think kind of that's informing this reaction. It's holy cow, I actually don't want to be writing JavaScript, right? It's give me a language where all these things are taken care of for me. So convenience has to win, right? It's it can't be, now self-identifying the developers, oh, don't give me all these rules, right? It's just put it into the library, put it into the framework, put it into the language, right? So I don't make these mistakes. I can personally speak to attest that there, you know, 90% of the errors I make are now impossible if you use kind of a functional programming style, if mutation is not allowed. That'd be, if I would put that out to you, it's man, wouldn't it be great to actually have this integrated into TypeScript or something where, you know, the compiler is actually protecting you.
I think we often lose track of the convenience side of things in security, and I'll give you a really good example. I wrote something in September about iPhone 10 and Face ID, you know, and look, there's going to be biometrics and it's going to be easy to unlock your phone. And it's a little bit different for me being in Australia and having a large American audience because there's a lot of social things that are different. And I kept hearing from security and privacy people in the US, they said, you should never use biometrics because the cops can force you to unlock your device if it's biometrics, but they can't if you've got a PIN. And as I probed away at this discussion, you realise how absurd it gets. And I had some person say, well, what if you're driving along in the car and the cops see you and they don't like you and they shoot your friend, and then they come over and you've been videoing it as they shoot their friend, and they come over and say, can you please unlock the phone for us so that we can erase the evidence of you videoing the friend? And they can do that if you've got biometrics, but not if you've got a PIN. And I'm they're just going to shoot you too. Or they're going to take your phone and smash it. And we just tend to get so myopic. And people say to me as well, they go, well, what if you're traveling to America? Will you take your phone with you because border could stop you and force you to unlock it? You know, would you unlock it if they demanded it? And I'm going, look, if I'm an Australian and I've come to the other side of the world and I'm jet lagged and I'm here for an important conference or something, and it is literally the difference between open your phone and we can look at it, or don't, and then you're going to have a permanent record of having been rejected from the country and you're never going to be allowed in again. You know, what do you think I'm going to do? So I just find that a lot of the arguments that get very, very security-centric are just totally detached from reality as well. So there's got to be balance there with the caveat that I understand that there are particular groups of people that are going to be massively higher targets for certain reasons, and it's going to differ a little bit for them. But for the most of us, we tend to sort of lose track a little bit of what the practical risks are.
Yeah, I think when it comes to engineering, you have to make the convenient thing the secure thing in order for it to be an effective security mechanism. Like, for example, when Facebook introduced XHP, there were a lot of like built-in cross-site scripting protections. And, for example, at Collide, we write software for a series of businesses. We're like a B2B endpoint company, and we started off with this multi-tenant application where like the application is dealing with tenancy, and this resulted in like a somewhat insecure application as well as a complex application. So we invested in writing some tooling that allows us to really easily like completely remove tenancy from the application and instead reason about it as an infrastructure concern, so that it's just like architecturally impossible for there to be like intermingling of data. And so like the application is simpler and the application is more secure. And like these are these kinds of things I think are the best security mechanisms in modern engineering.
Maybe just one thing I want to share with you is that one of my observations is that so many security practitioners, a lot of them that I've been studying might become engineering managers. And meaning that, so that problem of like they don't have the authority to, ask someone to change something, because they asked. They're actually leading teams. Allison Miller is now leading the engineering team. Dr. Batt is leading the engineering team. So I think maybe the right path for people who are, have such an interest in like changing the state of how we develop software and do it more securely. Maybe the path is actually they're going to own dev and ops, right? And their unique skill is how to, make these architectural decisions that actually end up not just good for security, but great for dev, QA, and ops too.
Thank you. Next one. Yes, sir.
This question is kind of targeted at Gene in your talk, but anyone can answer, obviously. You mentioned in your talk that you want to be able to reduce the number of teams and kind of because it makes things easier and have people kind of do the full stack. But my question is how do you go about educating people in order to do that? Because I find in particular security, which we're here talking about, there's lots of different areas of security, and even each individual in this room is not an expert in all of security. So if you're doing a full stack, how do you best educate these people to be able to do full stack development rather than just you failed here, here's how to fix it, you failed here, here's how to fix it.
Yeah, by the way, great question. In fact, let me first say that the last 2 years, how it's changed me is that I've become like the anti-full stack developer. I want to live in my perfect little functional programming world, right? Ideally, not even have to deal with input-output or whatever. The last thing I want to do is deal with logging, scheduling, right? I appreciate it, but I don't want to do it. So I think what I said more precisely was instead of what we want to do is enable developers to get stuff done without having to open up tickets. So in some ways, they can sort of stick in their, they can stay in their universe, but they can rely on logging, configuration, infrastructure, all to be done self-service. And what it does is radically change the way that teams work. There's a woman named Charity Majors. She's a former DBA. She was acquired by Facebook. It turns out like when you use platforms, whether it's Kubernetes or hosted Graphite or whatever, I mean, you're actually making a lot of sacrifices. You can't actually inspect those services. Those platforms don't actually care about you. They will rate limit you. They will make sure that you don't take down everybody else, right? And yet, most people would never go back to having to manage their own databases or manage their own whatever, right? So, I think the value of having those platforms, I think is really difficult to overstate. Yeah.
So one thing I also, I thought this was really interesting in Gene's talk as well, and I wanted to comment on it, and I meant to talk to Gene about it afterwards, but I didn't have a chance. But the thing that I don't want people to take away from the story of Sprouter at Etsy is that there was a design, an architecture that like created, it was a leaky abstraction, like there were 2 teams, there was a 3rd project, now there were 3 teams, and like they weren't decoupled well. So I don't think the solution to this is, monolith everything or create one team, because at Facebook, for example, this abstraction was GraphQL. And this allows front-end developers to be productive without needing to involve back-end developers, but it's not that like it's not that the like objective of trying to decouple some of the more advanced data access patterns from front-end development is a bad objective. It's that the architecture of the approach at Etsy was flawed, and that's why I loved, like, you know, Gene talked about Sprouter and how it had these problems, and then the next slide was about architecture and how you should focus on architecture and the implications that that has in development in your organization. So yeah, I think the conclusion to take there is not necessarily that you know, minimize the number of teams. It's that allow teams to be decoupled in their productivity.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So then how do you decouple them and get them to cooperate effectively? Because you probably only have like 3 security teams if they're decoupled. And how do they help an entire organization?
Oh, yeah, okay, great. And so I think, right, I mean, I think kind of to massively oversimplify, that the model used to be, I'm going to put in my application for a security review, right, and then, you know, I'm going to wait a month or two, right, and I'm going to get the big PDF file. And I think the model is more looking like, all right, you can do a security scan on demand. It's going to be integrated into this continuous integration pipeline, or not. Doesn't matter, right? There's an amazing Twitter story from Matadal, Collins, and Justin. I mean, they didn't even integrate into the CI pipeline, but the fact that developers could do it on demand without asking someone to do it radically changed behaviors and the outcomes. And I think that the work now looks more like, hey, I'm going to pair with you. I can pair with you, right, to help developers do things securely. We're going to train developers en masse. You know, we're going to do design reviews alongside the sprints. I mean, so I think it means that we're part of a team as opposed to sort of like some sort of distant approval body, right?
Yes, sir. Who gets? I guess Oleg, you get the last question. Sure.
Absolutely.
Right? There's advantages. So I'd like, instead of like, you know, babysitting developers, probably you just should use a so-called shift left. Right?
Yeah.
And let them do everything except from the most complicated things like research, you will never do it.
So I think that was my conclusion from the Mario presentation, right? It's like, you know what, in fact, the famous Facebook transfer, you know, the turning point arguably, right, I get the date wrong. It was around 2008, 2009. In the ops engineering team, there was this rule that if you're having a meeting, you can't have your laptop open unless you have a live site incident going on right then. And there was this one famous meeting where no one could close their laptops. Like all 14 people had their laptop open, fighting 14 different incidents, right? And like the lore goes that was when was it Chuck Pedro? Chuck Rossi, or somebody, right? They said, all right, from now on, every dev manager, every architect is going to be put on page rotation to share the pain, and so they can see the downstream effects of, you know, the stuff that they're putting into production. And like, I can't remember. I think within 3 to 6 months, suddenly, like the number of like 7 outages, you know, like disappeared. So I would say the same thing for security, right? It's like if everyone knows that I'm going to personally pay the price of, you know, vulns that I put into production, you know, suddenly all the incentives are working the same way.
Actually, you know what? I think that's I'm sorry, go ahead, Troy. Okay. I think it's actually a great place to end. As anybody knows my writings and latest talks, it's all about alignment of incentives. I think many of our technological problems, we have solutions for them, but you have to get the right people that can make an impact, incentivized to do the right thing at the right time. In many areas, we don't have that. So I love the incentives comment, just personal thing for me. So with that, we're going to close off the panel and close out the day. I wanted to thank everybody for sharing day one with us. Hope everybody learned a lot and had a great time. Please thank you to the panel. Help me out here. There are no formal conference festivities for the evening. Please enjoy the resort. There's lots of cool stuff. There's pools, there's restaurants, swimming pools, water slides, all kinds of stuff. I think a couple of us are going to go out to dinner wherever we can find a table. And doors open tomorrow morning at 8, and we're going to try to start on Hawaii time, but 9 o'clock sharp if you can make it. So please be here on time. We're going to have another great day. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Thanks.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for doing that.
Beautifully orchestrated. Thank you very much.
To see sweet Kona sun.